My name is Philippe Cloutier, President and CEO of Cartier Resources, listed on the TSX-V with the ticker symbol ECR. We are a gold explorer in the Abitibi Greenstone Belt, and our flagship project is the Chimo Mine project just east of Val-d'Or. We're currently drilling with 2 machines. We've just delivered an updated resource estimate, and 2023 will start with a PEA. There you have it.
Philippe, good to see you again. So now you're in Frankfurt, aren't you? What are you doing over there?
Yes, I am. There's the Dutch Gold Mess that SOAR Financial puts on. And earlier on in the week, I think there was the Precious Metals in Zurich. And there's another show, 1-to-1 mining. So it's a pretty busy week here in Frankfurt.
Yeah. Mines and money after that as well. It's the European time of the year. The worst time of the year to be in Europe, raining and cold. Lovely. Look, I wanted to catch up with you, obviously, off the back of your news. I do want to talk about that, but I also want to maybe give you a little bit of a hard time, okay? Because we're in this time frame at the moment where juniors are finding it harder and harder to stay relevant. And there's a few things happening in your neck of the woods. Obviously, the Agnico Eagle Yamana deal, that's kind of put the cat amongst the pigeons, because that's going to throw a few people's business plans out of kilter a bit. You know, you yourself, you've got a lot of answers already, but not enough, it seems, to be interesting for big boys to kind of come in and swoop in and like throw a lot of money at it. So what more do you need to do to stay relevant in that context?
Well, 2 things, a high-level answer to that, and then we'll dive deeper. We have to keep advancing the project. But the situation is that, as we've seen, once upon a time, our situation would have been a perfect takeout. Now, well, the goalposts they keep moving on us all the time. And whether it's financial, difficult economic times, or a general lack of interest by the investor, whatever reason, or the seniors are merging together, and their requests for projects are stronger. So, where once they would have bought a project that had ounces in the ground, they would buy it and then develop it themselves. Now they're buying projects that are already in production. They're buying cash flow, they're buying revenue. Juniors have to keep being creative and keep advancing their stories when their stories are worth advancing, such as ours.
Right, but you need money to do that? Yeah, you need to have the assets and a plan of how you're going to do that, because otherwise, I get this a lot. Juniors come in, we've got to keep the project moving, right? Or we're going to hunker down. They're going to make their mind up about what that is. Clearly, you're saying we're going to advance this. So again, come back to the question. So how do you move this forward? How do you advance the story?
Well, okay, there's a nuance between being relentless and being perseverant. When you persevere, when you know you're onto something and your project keeps delivering. And if it stops delivering, well, you're just being relentless and stubborn. In Chimo's case, well, every single drill program has brought new ounces, has discovered new zones, and we've seen that when we look at this with 25 years of additional mining and metallurgical innovations, well, we're on to the tipping point. And so with 60,000 meters of diamond drilling, we produced 4 resource estimates. We've consolidated with our neighbors. Now we're working on a PEA. We wouldn't be doing that if we didn't know that the answers kept being positive. So with $8 million in the bank, 2 rigs in the field, an updated resource estimate, and a PEA, that's what we're doing to keep moving the project, to keep the project moving forward. We're just going to have to be creative in how do we attract the right eyes on this project. And if not, well, the PEA is structured to build it yourself. It's on a path to production process approach. Whereas a few years ago, we felt that, hey, we're going to be taken out. Okay, so the situation has changed, and so we're forging on.
Right. Okay. So the few words in here, and like I said, I'm giving you a hard time because I want you to be able to express the plan, right? Because using the words creative suggests out of control. Okay, and you had Chimo up there, up for grabs. You felt at one time, this is something that people will come in and buy, and then you're going to follow a kind of cookie cutter approach here. And as you said, the goalposts are changing. It's changing in a sort of economic sense because of what's gone on with COVID and all the supply chain issues. And now we're sort of seeing a sort of global energy crisis layered on top of that. The goalposts are changing for everyone, but you must have an idea of the picture that you want to create, that you need to paint for people who perhaps looking in and saying, do you know what? This is starting to shape up to be the sort of thing which in the new mining paradigm we're in now is attractive. So what does that picture look like?
Well, the picture looks like when we had delivered the third resource estimate, we realized we were enclaved. We were up against physical property boundaries, and we knew, our competitors knew, that the mineralization continued east and west, and at depth it would actually plunge past their northern limit onto their ground. So we were enclaved. Early 2022, we consolidated with that ground. We, in the process, acquired another significant shareholder, O3 Mining, in exchange for their asset, 100% control of their asset. We relinquished 17.5% of our company to them. Agnico chipped in, and they then owned 18%. So we realized that we were up against physical boundaries. We've taken care of those. Now we can grow the property east and west in that depth. And the first thing we did was to consolidate the resource estimate that they had, the West Nordo deposit, with the Chimo Mine deposit resource estimate. And the reason we were able to do that is, well, both deposits are within operational distance, within 400 meters of each other. And so once we consolidated that, we put two machines to test the two pods that really are going to keep growing at depth. We've adjusted the PEA metrics to take into account the West Nordo. So what we're doing is, we know the market wants bigger and better. And fortunately for us, we were able to consolidate with our neighbor, and that's what we've delivered. Now, listen, we delivered at a time when the market was in turmoil. I think that we need just to keep advancing, and eventually people will recognize what we've accomplished in 2022 and 2023. Well, we'll start with a PEA.
Well, just do me a favor here. There's in the press release, there was a kind of diagram, a figure, which I think, for me, it was quite interesting to see what you were trying to do. I don't know if it's worth kind of pulling up there if you can, because it was talking about completed drill holes. You talk about drill holes in progress, and then planned drill holes. Going from the portal on the west all the way over to the kind of north, the rest of the properties that you've got. Can you pull that up for me?
Well, I have. Can you see it on your screen?
I can see it now. Thank you very much. Right. So what's actually going on here? Because it feels like you've got a lot about bits of it and not a lot about the rest. But if you could somehow join the dots, it could become quite interesting.
Yeah, indeed. Well, here, I don't know if you could see this, but
this
was the original eastern boundary. This was the western boundary. Mm-hmm. And so we couldn't grow the resource from there. We knew the system had a 3.7 kilometer strike length, roughly 1.2 either side of the historic shaft. And locally, we had drilled it down to 1.6, right? So here's the shaft. Here's the underground drifts. So the historic mine produced just under 400,000 ounces of gold. And it shut down in 1997, obviously, because the price of gold was $400 per ounce. From 2017 to 2020, we drilled off the resource estimates you see there: 720,000 ounces of indicated gold, 1.6 million ounces of inferred gold. And just off to the right side of the figure, you could see the West Nordo deposit. So when we merged the properties together, we then also consolidated the resource estimate. And indeed, what you can see there are, in black, what the drill holes that we've concluded. In orange, where the actual drills are set up right now and are currently drilling, and in magenta, where we eventually plan to drill. And in green, well, that's where the drill rigs will move over during the winter months. And the press release was all about two things. One, the first results that we saw from the diamond drilling. On the East Chimo Mine sector, we pulled a 9.9 gram over a meter within, a wider section that was, 6 meters wide. But the interesting thing here is that it is not on the 5N zone, which is essentially represented in that figure. It is behind the figure that you're looking at by a few tens of meters in what we now know is zone 3. So zone 3 was intersected or discovered in the late 80s, 44 grams per ton over a meter. And then in one of our programs, we intersected it at 300 meters, and we've just now punched it at 700 meters. So we're generating ounces on a parallel zone to this by a few tens of meters. And so ultimately, we're going to have more ounces per vertical meter. And in the West Nordo area, well, likewise, we intersected a 9 grammer over a meter, again within a 5 meter section. The drill program is answering our initial hypotheses. Can this thing grow? Can we build more ounces? And the answer is yes. The second part of the press release, listen, we've had comments to the effect that, the grades are relatively low on Chimo. Well, case in point, there are 3 other underground bulk mining underground situations along the highway that are mining 1.5 grams per ton. And the average grade of the mineralization at Chimo is 3. And we are very lucky at Chimo because of the mineralization contrast ore sorting test done in 2 independent labs, one at Steiner, one at Corem, returned the fact that this stuff can be pre-concentrated by using ore sorting, optical and XRF. So when you're breaking your rock underground and mining 3 grams, by the time it reaches surface, you've got 5 gram per ton material.
Okay.
The impact of that is significant because you're actually manipulating or transporting half of the rock that you're blasting. You're pre-concentrating it, and therefore bringing it to surface and sending to the mill material that is higher grade. And obviously, you're going to have a much less environmental impact at surface, which is all good, for sustainable development.
That's interesting because I think we put out a piece, crikey, last year about cost of underground mining in Canada, and we're saying at or around 4 grams per ton is sorry. At or below 4 grams a ton, can be cause your project to be marginal. Lots of factors involved in that, obviously, because it's a kind of broad number. But generally, companies don't tend to do well under 4 grams a ton. But so this ore sorting underground, that's a significant, dramatic economic change for you. So, would you?
Absolutely.
How many? I know you've done the test at surface, but in terms of how much do these things cost? How many of these do you put underground? And, and how quickly do they actually process the ore?
Okay, well, Matt, that's a very good question. Initially, we thought, listen, because this is, we have infrastructure, we're going to put the ore sorter at surface. And the engineers working on the PEA said, no, sir, we'll put that underground. You don't want to break 5,000 tons per day, haul it to surface, or sort it, and then send back half of it underground. You're going to do that underground. And once you touch the rock, you want to minimize the handling. You want to minimize the crushing. And so there are further tests that will have to be done with the ore sorting. I'll give you an example. Right now, we did it on an inch by, cubic inch, crushed rock. Maybe the sorting will enhance the grade even further if we further crush the rock, but then there are costs involved in further crushing rock. So, you're going to have to calibrate the system. The fact remains that this thing works on the Chimo type mineralization, and we intend to utilize it to the benefit of the project.
Okay, interesting. So I guess the PA will start to indicate the sorts of numbers around there, as you say.
Yeah, well, I'd like to add one thing back. During 2021 and 2022, just when the inflation started to hit the market, our industry, well, there was a lot of PAs and feasibilities that hit the market. And looking back at the numbers, we now know that, they won't fly. So we had the benefit of looking at what hurts a project the most and asking our engineers to address those issues, the high capex items, material handling sequences. So we're kind of lucky in the fact that we're going to be able to integrate what we feel are things that are required to make this thing work.
That's brilliant. I'm sort of intrigued by that, and I definitely agree with that. There's been a few companies coming on here recently who have been very nervous about putting out new economic studies with the new increased costs that we're seeing across the globe. Not least of all cost of diesel.
For example.
For example, for some people, it's 50% of their above ground costs. It's pretty chunky, right? So it matters.
In Quebec, you have hydroelectricity, which is dirt cheap. So again, we're lucky because of that. We're also lucky because we've identified that one of the major items is actually building a big new head frame with a super duper hoist. Well, you can see on this figure right here that we've actually put in a decline starting on West Nordo. So very shallow mining, because our mineralization starts at surface and we've only drilled it down to 1.6. We suspect it continues, but I mean, pacing yourself through this is probably going to be highly beneficial for the project.
Yeah. Look, I agree with that, and I wanted to kind of come on to that, but I want to stick with your point with regards to the economic study component. Is like it's going to be very difficult for true peer analysis, if you're taking economic studies from 2 years ago, even a year ago, quite frankly, and comparing it to today's, because they're extremely different scenarios, cost environments. We had a CEO come on in the last 2-3 weeks. He has moved from PA to feasibility study, and the numbers for him on his own project, as he said, are much, much, much higher than they had imagined. And there's some big decisions going to be made there around strategies. Do you start big? Do you start small? Do you hunker down? Do you advance meaningfully? So again, it's a kind of tricky environment, but as you say, if you pace yourself, perhaps there's a slightly different environment in 2023. Maybe there's a kind of metals bull environment.
Well, for sure.
Super cycle environment. Who knows?
A year ago, if you took a Polaroid along the Cadillac, you had Agnico that was operating jointly with Yamana on Canadian Malartic. In the interim, they merged with Kirkland Lake. They've had to go through that honeymoon process, and very recently, they're moving on Yamana. So all of a sudden, you've got Kirkland Lake and Yamana. They have disappeared. So not only are the costs of building projects and analyzing projects changing, but the ecosystem, the players out there are changing. Everything is changing. So a junior not only has to be relevant in the way it approaches exploration of a project and validation of that project, but it also has to do that in the context of understanding the new environment in which it's operating.
Yeah, it's interesting times. It's interesting times.
Oh yes.
Sure.
And explorationists are used to that. They're used to headwinds and storms, and
Investors, not so much. And that's why, like I say, I want to kind of push certain companies to say, like, I think there's something good there, but you need to express it differently or clearly or, articulately. So people understand, how do you navigate these choppy waters going forward? You've got money, you've got options about the pace at which you move forward, but it does come back to that thing of, right, if you know who your end audience is, in your case, maybe an Agnico, maybe something to be done with O3 money, depending on if they can sort their own issues out. There's lots of options on the table eventually, but with $8 million, what's that path forward look like for you? And to come back to that painting of pictures, you've got to tell a story for these audiences, because what you thought was good 2 years ago doesn't stack up today but you're cognizant of having to, address that. So right, so thanks for pulling that diagram up. It might be worth just taking that off, and we can actually see your lovely visage. And so the rest of this year, not much left the rest of this year. So 2023 for you looks like what? It's clearly more drilling, but to what end? What is the data that you're looking for?
You make a very good point. Yes, we have two machines. So we obviously are going to expect drill results, and we are drilling with the idea of growing the resource base. But at the same time, we're going to deliver the PA, which in itself will provide a recommendations chapter. Now, I caution people that we've done much of the what I would call inexpensive type of exploration, from PA to pre-feasibility. Then you start to move into more expensive exploration because you're infill drilling, right? And because you want to, the next step is going there. So we'll base ourselves and make some very good decisions moving forward. And one of those decisions is to try to come up with some alternative solutions to develop this thing, or move it forward. Listen, now that we've consolidated the both properties, there are other deposits to the east and to the west that we're going to have to investigate resource base. Some of them will be included in the economic planning. Some won't, because they require a whole new set of infrastructure. But this thing continues to grow, and that I'm very happy of. We have $8 million in the bank, drill results, PA. I mean, now 2023 is going to be a year where we have to move this thing forward.
You do. Well, okay, that's fair enough. You're still thinking, you're adjusting, you're trying to be agile because of the market conditions. Because as someone said to me yesterday, said, like, there's so many of these goddamn exploration companies, and even if they've got a resource, they're all around this 1 million ounce level. It's like, it's, his words, boring. I don't know who to look at or why I'm looking at them, because they've got no idea about what the future holds. They are expressing themselves through the drill bit and the drill bit only. But you've got to, his words, the truth. You've got to be working towards something or someone in mind. And even if that changes along the way, that's fine. But drilling in itself is not enough. It's that story you're able to tell as a result of the data you get.
No, and I did mention earlier on that you say you're going to do something, you do it, and then and you're being told, if you do this, you'll be rewarded. You get to that goalpost and they've moved it. So we have to stop trying to feed the market. We have to do what we can control and not worry about what we cannot control. And a lot of these juniors are saying, "Oh, I'm undervalued. That we have a value proposition." Listen, if you keep building your story, it will find its audience, and at one point, people will say, "Okay, this thing's going to fly, and I'd better get on the train here." But that's all I can do, is keep moving this project forward.
Well, you keep doing that, Philip, and keep coming back and telling us what's going on. Interesting story. I appreciate it's changing and evolving. Not your story. The market is changing and evolving on something. You need to adapt to that, but to put yourself in the position to do something about it, to retain more control than some others have, is good.
The sailing analogy, Matt, from point A to point B is not one straight line. You have to adjust your sails constantly. You're zigzagging across the ocean to get there, to get to the port.
Yeah, and there's tides and there's currents. We love a sailing analogy. Yes. So many things to take.
It's a good analogy, and it's, you know what, the juniors out there better, and the seniors have told us, look at what we're doing. We're merging. We're finding synergies. You do the same thing. So the juniors that still want to be around in 2, 3, or 4 years, they better get their act together, and they better,
hold the main sheet in. We better stop. We better stop with the mining. Those sailing analogies right now.
Furl the spinnaker or whatever.
Okay, and Roger the cabin boy gets mentioned. Right. We should
we'll be back for more drill results and PA for sure.
Good stuff. See you soon.
Okay. Ciao.